Hello and welcome to this edition of World at War. My name is Mohammed Saleh. Russia has made its intentions pretty clear, with Ukraine's Western allies giving the green signal for Kiev to use long-range weapons to strike targets deep inside Russia. Moscow wants to turn the tables on Washington. Not only is Vladimir Putin now threatening to arm the enemies of the Western nations, but what is interesting is that the Russian warships appear to be heading towards the Caribbean for some surprise and unannounced war games to project Russian naval power in the Western Hemisphere. A war that Washington thought would be fought only in the muddy battlefields of Europe appears to be spreading its effect to the shores of the United States. So how will the Biden administration respond to the Russian warships who will be making port calls in Cuba and Venezuela and also testing their firepower in the Caribbean? Our next report gets you more details. The NATO military alliance can no longer claim that it is not involved in the Ukraine war. The decision of what weapons Ukraine will fight this war with and the targets that Ukraine will strike to defend itself aren't just being made in Kiev, but in fact are being controlled directly by NATO's military allies.
Ukraine has the right to defend itself. They have the right to strike military targets on the Russian territory, and we have the right to help them with that task.
On the 7th of June, 5 American-manufactured long-range ATACMS were used to strike a building in Russian-occupied Luhansk in which over 20 people were injured. The Russian city of Belgorod, that is about 40 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, is bearing the brunt. Shelling by the Ukrainians has resulted in the deaths of 4 civilians and at least about 12 people, including a child, have sustained injuries. Galina Nizamuddinova, a resident of Belgorod, describes the moment when a Ukrainian shell struck her neighborhood.
Oh, I saw. I heard. It was very loud. I got scared and screamed. I took a few things and wanted to go to my children in the city center. I thought about a taxi maybe. I got out and there's a crowd of people near the car. And everything is already broken.
The scale of the Ukrainian attacks inside the Russian territory are nowhere near the scale of the devastation that the Russians have heaped over the Ukrainians. This drone footage, captured this week from over the city of Vovchansk in Kharkiv, will give you a glimpse of what's been unleashed on the Ukrainians. Kiev still controls about 70% of Vovchansk. 17,000 civilians have fled from here. And soldiers are battling street by street to control this crucial city that's now been reduced to complete ruins. But there's still no possibility of talks or ceasefire in this war. France, Germany and now the United States have given the green signal for Ukraine to strike targets inside the Russian territory using long-range missiles. And Vladimir Putin has made no bones about how Russia would respond to this Western strategy.
We are thinking that if they consider it possible to deliver such weapons to the combat zone to launch strikes on our territory and create problems for us, why don't we have the right to supply weapons of the same type to some regions of the world where they can be used to launch strikes on sensitive facilities of the countries that do it to Russia? The answer may be asymmetric.
If the Russian president follows through on this threat, this would be a major inflection point in this war. But a bigger concern that's been flagged by the American officials is the path taken by the Russian warships, who appear to be headed for some surprise and unannounced war games in the Caribbean. The United States, which is tracking the Russian warships and aircraft, has indicated that the Russian warships could make port calls in Cuba and even in Venezuela, as they engage in this exercise of heightened air and naval firepower. The last time the Russian warships had moved into the Caribbean for military drills was in 2019. But what is different this time round is that the United States and Russia are caught in an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation on the battlefields of Ukraine. The United Nations has added the state of Israel to its blacklist of nations that have committed abuses against children in armed conflict. This has been confirmed by the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan. Even Israel's staunchest ally, the United States, has been questioning Israel about the tactics that it has deployed in the Gaza Strip. But perhaps the clearest indicator that Washington and Tel Aviv do not see eye to eye over their Gaza policy became apparent when Joe Biden floated his peace proposal for the Gaza war. In a clear affront to Joe Biden, who has backed this Israeli war to the hilt for the last 8 months by supplying weapons and other resources, Biden's ally in Tel Aviv has refused to play ball for a ceasefire deal proposed by Joe Biden. Our next report gets you more details. On the 6th of June, Israel bombed a United Nations-run Al-Sardi school in the Nusayrat refugee camp in central Gaza. At least 2 Israeli missiles struck the United Nations school in the dead of the night, where at least about 6,000 Palestinian people who had sought refuge were sleeping. The death toll in just this one massacre is reported to be over 45, with at least 14 of those who were killed said to be young children along with their mothers. Israel has bombed the power supplying grid line to the Nusayrat refugee camp, so the bodies of those who were killed were pulled out from the rubble, so the rescue work was done using torches. The injured were rushed to the hospital, and as the day broke, the scale of the tragedy became clear.
We are displaced in Al-Qastal Towers. My son called us at 2:30 in the morning to say that Ahmed had been martyred. They hit them with a missile in the classroom in the school. We came here. We have been awake and have not slept until now. He is the youngest one of my sons and my dearest.
Israel claims that it targeted at least 20 to 30 Hamas fighters who were hiding in the United Nations-run school. But questions have been raised as to why Israel bombed such a heavily populated school where thousands had sought refuge at a time when everyone was asleep in the night. On the 8th of June, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, put out this video, in which he was seen talking to whom he claimed was a United Nations official.
I am utterly shocked and disgusted by this shameful decision of the Secretary General. Courtney, you know that Israel's army is the most moral army in the world. So this immoral decision will only aid the terrorists and reward Hamas.
Not for the first time, the Palestinians have been driven around from one place to another in search of safety, are again packing up whatever little belongings they have and are moving again. The Palestinians who are living through this war say the Israeli forces, who call themselves the most moral army in the world, have repeatedly told them to go to places that are designated as safe zones, only to bomb those designated safe zones.
By God, it was a very difficult night. We didn't sleep. It started early, from about 10:30 at night, bombing that didn't stop, and it kept coming down further and further west until it reached the sea, and we could hear the sound of the bombing around us. No one slept. We didn't sleep. We were awake all night. We weren't able to sleep.
At least 150 people have been killed in a massacre in central Sudan. The massacre has been blamed on the powerful paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, and it reportedly took place on the 5th of June in 2 waves with heavy artillery. The RSF is yet to comment on the accusations, but it has boasted the next day of attacking 2 army positions. Sudan's military government has called for international condemnation of the attack. During the course of the 13-month war in Sudan, both the Sudanese military and the paramilitary RSF have been accused of committing war crimes, indiscriminately shelling residential areas, looting and obstructing humanitarian aid. Our next report gets more details.
This video of rows of bodies wrapped in white shrouds prepared for a mass burial in the village of Wad al-Nura in Gezira state has elicited widespread condemnation. Reportedly, the video was filmed by a Sudanese pro-democracy activists committee, namely the Madani Resistance Committee. Though a confirmed toll of the dead and the wounded is still awaited, at least 150 are feared dead, with many more still missing. The circumstances of the killings remain shrouded in mystery. It is alleged to be the handiwork of RSF fighters, who reportedly invaded and attacked the village twice in the same day. The RSF, spearheaded by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, seized control of the Gezira state to the south of the capital, Khartoum, in December last year. RSF has been accused of carrying out numerous abuses against civilians in the Gezira state, a charge which it denies. The rivals, RSF and the Sudanese military, have been battling over control of the country for over 13 months. Intense fighting continues between the warring factions in El Fasher, a city in Darfur, in the west of the country. Across the country, the war has killed tens of thousands of people, including up to 15,000 in a single West Darfur town. The overall death toll, though, remains unclear. The U.S. Special Envoy for Sudan, Tom Perriello, estimates the death toll to be up to 150,000. Several rounds of peace talks have failed to bring an end to the war, which had erupted in mid-April last year, when the two generals, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, fell out over the planned integration of the paramilitary RSF into the regular army, an internationally backed political transition plan. The 13-month-long war in Sudan risks triggering the world's largest hunger crisis. About 25 million people, approximately half of the country's population, are in need of all types of humanitarian assistance, whereas more than 18 million people are grappling with food insecurity. 3.6 million children are acutely malnourished. Internal displacement figures in Sudan could top 10 million within days. And yet, despite such heart-wrenching statistics, the war in Sudan increasingly appears to have been forgotten in the backdrop of the Russia-Ukraine and Israel-Palestine conflicts. In a country which has experienced only brief democratic interludes, this latest conflict has created one of the worst humanitarian nightmares in recent history, which is worsening with each passing day.
The female mayor, Yolanda Sanchez, of a western Mexican town was ambushed and killed by gunmen on the 3rd of June. The assassination took place barely hours after the nation celebrated the election of Claudia Sheinbaum as the nation's first female president. Mexico's general election was the bloodiest in the country's history, with independent surveys putting the total number of political candidates who have been killed close to 40. Sheinbaum will be sworn in as the president on the 1st of October, has pledged to continue the outgoing president and her mentor, Manuel Obrador's controversial hugs and not bullets strategy of tackling crime at its roots. But the question, of course, is this: will this strategy prove effective in dealing with the ultra-violent drug cartels who go to extreme lengths to ensure that their preferred candidate wins? Our next report gives you more details.
In Mexico, politics, crime, and corruption are closely entangled. This notion about the drug cartels plagued Latin American nation was reinforced on Monday when Yolanda Sanchez was ambushed and shot dead by gunmen in the center of Cotija, a town she had governed since September 2021. She held the distinction of being the first woman to be elected to the post. Local media reported that she was shot 19 times and died in hospital shortly after the attack. Her bodyguard was also killed in the attack. No arrests have been made so far in connection with the case, though it is widely believed that the gunmen belonged to an organized crime group. Yolanda had reported receiving death threats after taking up office in September 2021. Reportedly, it was demanded that she hand the security of the town over to state police officers on the payroll of organized crime groups.
There were a series of threats to the personnel of the municipality. There was a demand that the army and the National Guard didn't carry out the security tasks, and that the mayor prevented federal forces from taking these actions.
A defiant Yolanda had refused the demand and asked for the military to reinforce the town. Given the danger involved, the mayor was also provided with armed guards.
Obviously, that was not possible, and it was not at the reach of the mayor considering the obligations of authorities. All security forces and the justice are obliged to be present if necessary. In the case of Kotiha and nearby towns, it has to do with the fact there is a turf war between criminal bands.
Last year, when she was visiting the neighboring state of Jalisco, she was kidnapped at gunpoint and held for 3 days by armed men. Demands were made and psychological terror inflicted before she was released. She at the time had said that she did not know what criminal group was involved in the kidnapping, though local newspapers had said the most likely culprits were the Jalisco New Generation cartel. The CJNG is notorious for drug trafficking, extortion, as well as kidnapping for ransom. The cartel is also infamous for targeting public officials who refuse to toe its line. In a country where 10 women or girls are murdered every day, Mayor Yolanda Sanchez's murder, less than a day after the election of country's first female president, is a grim reminder of the challenge posed by the drug cartels. The big question is, how prepared is Claudia Sheinbaum to tackle this tough challenge?
Tensions escalated once again on the Korean peninsula on the 29th of May after North Korea launched some 260 balloons that dropped rubbish and manure onto towns and cities across South Korea, including onto the runway of Seoul's main airport. Pyongyang continued to rile its rival neighbor by sending 600 more balloons that carry trash. Later, Pyongyang said that it would stop sending these balloons provided South Korea would stop sending balloons that carry anti-Pyongyang propaganda. But Seoul responded on Tuesday by suspending an inter-Korean military deal that was signed in 2018. Following the suspension, the South Korean military said that it would resume all military activities along the demarcation line separating the two Koreas. So what is life like at the demarcation line between North and South Korea? Our next report gets you more details.
North and South Korea are both guilty of using balloons in their propaganda campaigns since the Korean War in the 1950s. North Korean defectors and activists in South Korea have long sent balloons filled with anti-Pyongyang leaflets, cash, food, medicine, and even USB sticks loaded with K-pop music videos and dramas across the border. Pyongyang is extremely sensitive to these leaflets containing information about the outside world and critical of the three-generation Kim dynasty's rule since the founding of North Korea by Kim Il-sung in 1948. An infuriated Pyongyang retaliated in kind from Tuesday night to Wednesday by sending some 260 balloons carrying bags of trash including cigarette butts, compost, waste batteries, and toilet paper and more into South Korea.
I heard a loud sound of something huge falling down. Then something started flying around the road, and then the police officers set up the police line right away. And the investigation team came to the field and they began investigating. It was so creepy and scary that the balloon might have fallen down because North Korea designated a specific target. Everyone was so scared at that moment. I wondered what would have happened to us if there were not just rubbish but viruses or chemicals.
The North Korean campaign was accompanied by attempts to jam GPS systems in South Korea. Sarcastically, Pyongyang labeled the balloons gifts of sincerity for South Korea. The next day, South Korean military warned the North to stop sending balloons carrying rubbish, calling the act inhuman, low-level and nasty, which violates the 1953 armistice.
Full responsibility for issues occurred by North Korea's filled balloons against the South lies entirely with North Korea. And we once again gravely warn North Korea to immediately halt their inhuman, low-level and nasty activity which violates the armistice agreement.
The North Korean balloon campaign, though, continued on Sunday, with the South Korean military claiming to have collected a further 700 rubbish bags sent from North Korea. The same day, North Korean Vice Minister of Defense said that they are halting the balloon campaign temporarily, given the campaign has left South Koreans with enough experience of unpleasantness and effort required to remove scattered rubbish. Additionally, he threatened that Pyongyang would resume the practice if anti-Pyongyang leaflets are flown over again from South Korea. The suspension, however, appeared to have come a little late. On Tuesday, the South Korean government announced that it was suspending an inter-Korean military deal signed in 2018 with the aim of easing animosities at their heavily militarized border.
Our government has decided to suspend the entirety of the 9.19 military agreement effective Tuesday, June 4th at 3 p.m., following the resolution of the cabinet meeting and the president's approval. This suspension will remain in effect until mutual trust between the North and South is restored. This measure aims to fully restore our military activities along the military demarcation line and the northwestern islands, which have been restricted by the 9.19 military agreement.
A day after South Korea said it will resume all military activities along the border with the North, a US B-1 strategic bomber dropped a guided GDAM weapon as part of the military drills with South Korean and US fighter jets over Korean peninsula. Amid escalating tensions, North Korean defectors and South Korean activists released 10 balloons carrying about 200,000 anti-Pyongyang leaflets, $2,000 in $1 bills, and USB drives containing K-pop music and dramas in the border city of Pocheon. Both sides have accused each other of being the agent provocator. The question to ponder here is, will this recent escalation in hostilities along the tense border spiral out of control?
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of World at War. If you want to reach out to me with any comments, feedback or suggestions, feel free to do so on the ID that you're seeing on your screens. I'm your host, Mohammed Saleh, and I'll see you again next week.